Welcome to the Pindown, your Detroit Pistons podcast. I'm your host, Wes Davenport from Motor City Hoops and Detroit Bad Boys.
And I'm Blake Silverman, writer for Detroit Bad Boys, covering everything from the Pistons to the NBA draft and the Motor City Cruise.
Blake, man, it's draft day. Maybe not NBA draft day, but it is the NFL draft. It's being held in Detroit. A lot of excitement going on around Michigan and around the city for that, which I know you're nearby, even though I'm over here on the other side of the state. Why don't we just open up the show by making ourselves a little embarrassed by the time this thing actually gets published? We're obviously recording Thursday before 8 p.m., so the draft hasn't even started yet. But I want to get your Lions prediction. Who are they going to take? Are they even going to make a selection in the first round? Call your shot now, and we'll know by the time this actually gets published whether we were right or wrong.
Man, they are for sure going to take someone that I don't even know or haven't watched a single second of them play. So the only player that I know that I've seen mocked to them is the Kool-Aid McKinstry from Alabama. I know they need corners. I've also seen, I forget what mock draft it was, but I saw Sanders still as well. But I don't really know next to anything about what's going to happen and for the Lions specifically. So I'm ready to be so wrong. Who do you have them taking? How do you see the Lions draft shaking out, at least tonight in the first round?
I'm just rooting for fun, Blake. So Sanders still would be fun because Michigan and obviously the Aiden Hutchinson connection. So that would be fun. Trading up would be fun. I have no idea what's going on with any of these prospects. I don't watch NFL draft tape, none of it. So I'm just going to turn on the TV and root for something entertaining to happen and hope that it all goes that way. So I'll call the shot and say they trade up just because it'd be entertaining to watch.
There you go. I would love that too. I mean, no matter what the draft is, I love the NFL draft. I'm not as tuned in as I have been in the past, especially now that the Lions are at the back end of the first round. But I'm excited, and it's super cool that it's in Detroit. I mean, I don't have any plans to go down or anything. I feel like it's a zoo down there, but it's cool. I've seen all the pictures and everything that they did to set the city up for it. It looks awesome. I'm excited to see how it turns out.
Oh, shoot. You know what? Last Lions thing. Blake, you're a stylish guy, right? You get the hair looking good.
Oh, I don't know about
You got
that.
the collared shirts going on. You know, you're a stylish kind of guy. What'd you think about the new jerseys? You know, I don't have any style, so this is all you. Just give a quick review for all the listeners. They want to know.
That is not true. I don't have any style either, but I like the new jerseys. I was ready for them to go back to that 90s or even into the early 2000s style that they had, just with the blue, silver with the white accents. I love the home blue jersey. I think they did well. The black ones, those were the ones that I wasn't super sure about, but they look nice in the release event that they did, and I think they'll look nice on the field. So I was happy with them. What are your thoughts?
Well, I have a Calvin Johnson black Reebok from way, way back in the day, one of the original ones from when I was a kid, that I do still wear occasionally to games. So I'm a little biased there, and I'll just leave it at that. But speaking of draft,
I have to jump in with a Lions jersey thing before we move on. I have the year Ford Field open. I have a Honolulu blue, back to when there weren't any black accents in the jerseys. I have a Joey Harrington Lions with the inaugural Ford Field patch on it. It's like a youth medium. I wish it still fit me today, but that's one I look back on and I'm like, man, that was a great jersey. Not in the time, but I think it would be great to have now and wear to games and stuff like that.
That would be sweet. The only reason the Calvin one still fits me now is because when I was a kid growing up, I grew so fast. My mom's just like, look, we're not going to buy you clothes that fit. We're going to buy you larges and XLs for everything. And maybe one day they fit. So truthfully, it's still too big. I had a lot of clothes from middle school that are way too big for me now. I had to get rid of them. But that's just how the cards end up getting played, right? But all right, let's talk about some NBA draft now, because this is a Pistons podcast. So we're going to stick with that. We had talked a little bit about doing a big board for this. I think we're going to keep it to just the top 5 so that we can fit it here in the first few minutes. But why don't you go first? Let's go spot by spot. Just give who we have at that position and then kind of a reaction from the other person. So I'll let you go and then I'll follow up.
All right, cool. And this is Pistons specific, but my number one, and I mean, I think it would be general too, is Alex Sarr. I think he's right now like the best prospect. There are questions in his game. This is definitely a year where number one is more open than, I mean, maybe any as it has been in the past, but the tools Alex Sarr has, especially defensively with some offensive upside, if you're at number one, I think he's just not far and away, but getting too far and away the best prospect available right now.
All right, so I've got him number one as well. So I want to ask you this. Do you think year one that Alex Sarr can be a good or even like very good defender at the NBA level? Because he's probably a 5. And at that spot, you need to be a very good defender, right? I mean, we've talked about that plenty. So is that something you think he can bring right away? Or is that still a little bit more of a work in progress at this point, given that he is so young and is a little bit more raw just with the rest of his game as well?
I think he'll be good. I don't want to say very good just because I think he has work to do both in his game, his footwork, but most importantly, just adding size. I mean, he has a great frame as a NBA center, and he played in the NBL, which is a great professional league, and saw success there. The role he played in the NBL is a little different than what he'll be asked to do if he went to a team like the Pistons, but I still think he can be a good defender, mainly because he moves so well and is athletic at his size. I think he can improve and maybe get to a very good defender one day. I'm just not there yet, but I think he should be good defensively out of the gate.
All right, and last thing with him, let's talk just briefly his fit with Detroit, right? Because it does get a little bit interesting. They already have really 2 centers in Jalen Duren and Isaiah Stewart. You would be adding a third that you're heavily invested in. Now, there are those that make the argument that Alex Sarr can play the 4. I'm curious if you buy into that or not. Personally, I don't. I don't think he's got enough off the dribble to really do that at effectively on offense. I think he could do it defensively. I think I would trust him on the perimeter, especially on switches. But in general, I do view him as almost exclusively a 5 and maybe short stints at the 4. So if you pick him, what are the dominoes that have to fall after that selection in order to make the roster make a little bit more sense?
Right. It's interesting just because the elephant in the room of how is it going to work with Jalen Duren. I personally think that Sarr should be more in that exclusive 5 role. The swing skill, I guess, is just the shot, the outside shot. I mean, he needs to work on his touch near the rim as well, but to be able to play the 4, I think he really needs to be able to stretch the 4 more than we've seen already. It's possible, but I think that's the biggest question mark right now. And like you said, it's possible that he can play the 4 in spurts, but how long those spurts will be and should be is definitely a huge question mark right now. But over time, like, he has improved as a free throw shooter. He's shown flashes as a shooter, so I think he could get better and maybe play the 4 one day, but I don't think any team who's drafting him is really drafting him to play the 4, even though maybe he could, and you can make that argument.
All right, this is a great call out here from Jonathan Schwartz in our comment section. He asks, how much does Evan Mobley do off the dribble? It's a great call out for 2 reasons. One, Evan Mobley is a guy that I actually compare Alex Sarr to personally. Bryce Simon obviously does as well. Mentioned it just this past week on the Pistons Pulse. It's a good comp. I think it makes a lot of sense. And secondly, obviously, Evan Mobley is currently playing a lot of 4 right now for the Cavs. Here's the catch, though. He doesn't throw a lot off the dribble, and that limitation on its own is a large reason why you see so many Cavs analysts having the discussion of, hey, do they need to make a choice between Jared Allen and Evan Mobley? Like, it's not working out as well as you would hope for the Cavs, even though they are having a lot of success, which us Pistons fans are certainly right to be a little bit jealous of. Let's go to number 2. I've got Zachary Risachet there. I still buy into it. He's kind of struggled here down the stretch with his shot. I think he's still been impactful as a defender, though, as well on offense in general, even though that jump shot hasn't been falling so much. I do think over the entire season, he's still over 39% from the 3-point range. So I do buy into the jump shot. He's a good athlete. He's long. There's a little bit of oddball potential there, though maybe not as much as you'd really like for this high up in the draft. Overall, I think he's just a solid 3-and-D wing, and he's very young, which is something that this team really needs. So what are your thoughts on Risachet being number 2, and who do you have number 2 if it's not Risachet?
Yeah, so I have Risachet at number 3. I'm with you. He's someone I didn't really know what to do with on this Pistons specific board, honestly, just because he has went through a bit of a cold stretch. Like you said, I don't think it should be a total fault against him. That said, there are some wings that are like top 10 to 15 range that have similar archetype that you could make an argument that maybe they're a better pick than Risachet, but Risachet, even though he's went through a bit of a shooting slump, he's still shooting the ball well. So I think he has to be in consideration at that range. I don't really know if I would think about taking him over an Alex Sarr, for example, but I think, I'm not there either, but I think he's still the swing skill for me, or I guess just putting it in a Pistons lens and how he would fit is how he moves off the ball. And I think he's shown that he can be a great off ball defender, but offensively, I'm curious your thoughts. Like, what have you seen with him as a cutter, and how he could play with like Cade Cunningham as the primary initiator?
Yeah, so I think he moves well off the ball. They have used him a bit as just a guy running off screens every now and then, which has been nice. He also seems to have a decent feel for the pass and relocate off of some of his drives when he kicks, which is always nice to see out of a guy who could shoot the ball like he can. I think my concern with him with Detroit is I'm not entirely convinced he can really play out on the wing yet. He is, as big as he is, he's small, if that makes sense. He's pretty lanky. He's light. He doesn't have a lot of strength to him. And I do think that shows up pretty frequently when he's making drives to the rim and even when he's guarding bigger ball handlers. So I would be a little worried about him, even as a defender, guarding quite a few threes in the NBA. I almost wonder if he'd be better off playing at the 2 early on and just kind of being that off-ball sniper offensively and handling shorter, less bulky players on the other end of the floor. So that's something I've been thinking about a little bit as well. Like, would a Risachet actually eat into Jaden Ivey's minutes more so than a guy like a Sar Thompson, even, which is kind of a unique, not necessarily problem, but a unique thing to watch for Risachet.
Yeah, and Coffee actually brings up Tidjane Salaam here, who Wes, we've talked about. Another one, sort of who I was alluding to as one of those like wing prospects that you could have that debate against Risachet. Salaam is a lot more raw, but he has a lot of the same tools. He's shot the ball well. He's shown some improvement. He's shown defensive tools that can work over time. He's so young. I mean, same thing as Risachet. Like, you're betting on the upside here, but Salaam is one of those guys that you're like, what's the difference between him and Risachet, and are some of the things that Salaam has shown better, like make you want to even draft him if you're sitting at number 5 and both Risachet and Salaam are on the board. So before I say who I had at number 2, any thoughts you have on Salon?
I have Salon at number 5. I mean, a little spoiler alert here because we're going to do a top 5 big board, but I do literally have him number 5 on my board. I think the difference really between him and Reese O'Shea is far more of a wing guard kind of prospect. He can do a lot more with the ball in his hands. He's a much more creative finisher and driver as well. Salon he's bigger for one, but he's also more offensively, he's a straight line driver only, right? You don't see a lot of creativity from him when he's getting downhill. He's a very good cutter. I think he's a better off-ball mover, but I wouldn't really run him through a lot of screens. Salon they've used pretty frequently as a pick and pop guy, a pick and roll guy as well, which you see Reese O'Shea on the other end of that more often than not. So at this point, Salon looks more like a off-ball 4 on both ends to me. He's another guy where there are some concerns with him on ball, guarding on ball. But his motor runs so hot that he's very good at jumping passing lanes. He's very good at rotating over, even to the point where he over rotates very often, gets himself out of position because he's so eager to do it. But so I look at him as more of a 4 who occasionally could play down at the 3, whereas Reese O'Shea is a pretty solid 3-2 combo. You could probably split his time from either spot. So, the archetype of player that Reese O'Shea is, I think, is a little more valuable than Salon, even though they're both very young and they both definitely have a lot of room to improve. The difference, I guess, if you want to throw player roles or player comps, when you're looking at Reese O'Shea, just think of a pure 3-and-D wing. And when you're looking at Salon, think more along the lines of what Aaron Gordon does for the Denver Nuggets, which is just kind of a super utility guy who's athletic, which I still think is valuable, but you'd rather have Reese O'Shea if you had to choose.
Yeah, I'm with you, but I love what I've seen from Salon. He's shown a lot of
Me too.
Good things and interested. I know that both of them are still playing. I'm not sure what their season looks like and how much they have left, but I'm interested to see what they do. But took us a long way to get here. But my number 2 on the board for the Pistons is Reed Sheppard out of Kentucky.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, I just think, okay, I'm just gonna bring the slights out of the gate. He's an undersized guard. He's a small guard. That's what you're getting. But the efficiency that he showed at Kentucky, and on top of that, just all the winning plays that he made and really just feel for the game. I feel like you can't look past that. And going back to the shooting, he shot close to 50-50-90, not even 50-40-90. He shot the leather off the ball at Kentucky. He wasn't really he just skyrocketed up draft boards. And I think it's real. I think if you're looking at this group, this draft class, if you're taking the lottery prospects or whatever you want to be, Reed is one of those guys that I look to and I can say pretty confidently that he's going to be a good NBA player for a long time. And I like his fit next to Cade Cunningham. I think he's shown a decent amount off the ball, and I think he can make the right reads, make plays, and he's also really active defensively. He's undersized, yes, but he made a lot of great plays and got Kentucky out into transition pretty quickly when he's playing next to a bunch of other like draft prospects like Rob Dillingham. Like there were a lot of mouths to feed on that team, and Reed was always the shining star. And he was like coming off the bench as well. So I just think a guy like that is rare, and he's a young prospect that you are happy to take a bet on, even with the size concerns.
Yeah, and I'll just say too, with how short he is, I don't care how short you are. If you're going to shoot 50% from three from deep, like not even close to the line, you can play for my team. Like the just bottom line, if you're going to shoot it that well on a high volume from really deep, sign me up. You're good. I have Reed Shepherd number 3. So just
we
behind
were
Ricochet. We just flipped the two. Jonathan Schwartz brings up a good point here, and I think it's worth discussing. Would you keep Sasser if you picked Reed Shepherd? And I think it's a particularly good question, but kind of for a backwards reason, because I think both of those guys are shooting guards.
Yeah,
both of those
I
guys
agree.
are tremendously undersized shooting guards.
Yes, and I mean, ideally, like Sasser is your like 2 off the bench if you are keeping him, but I think if you bring in Reed, and like I don't know really what Sasser's like trade value is on the open market. Like I think he could net you something, but the point is, I think it makes Sasser a bit more expendable. I mean, he might even be expendable as it is right now. But I mean, I think it can work. I think Sasser can thrive as like that 2 guard who can come and get you some quick buckets off the bench and like catch heat, like we saw him do a handful of times in his rookie season.
Yeah, I agree. And the thing with Reed Shepherd too is I don't know how much I trust him to really run the offense, even for short stretches. He is not a guy that's going to get by anybody. As intelligent as he is, as high level of a feel that he has as a playmaker, his ability to process what's going on in front of him, he needs a screen or a slanted floor. So, like, honestly, I would rather have Jaden Ivey running the show for stretches than I'd have Reed Shepherd. And we've obviously discussed, reservations on having Jaden Ivey do that exact thing. So, yeah, Reed's a very specific prospect, and I like him a lot. Obviously, I had him 3. You have him 2. But, yeah, I mean, it's definitely a discussion. Do you want to have 2 shooting guards that are under 6'2"? Good question there by Jonathan Schwartz that I don't have an answer to. Let's go to number 4. I'm just going to say mine, then I want to hear yours. Mine's Dalton Connect. Who do you got?
I have Donovan Clingan.
Ooh, Clingan is 6 for me. We're right there.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, we've talked about Connect before. I actually, spoiler alert, I have him at number 5, so we're really not too far off. But Clingan, I mean, I think defensive minded big is a need to address. We've talked about Jalen Duren's defense at length, so I won't get too much into it, but Clingan has his limitations. He doesn't shoot threes. He's not going to stretch the floor for you, but he's a matchup problem. And we saw what he did at UConn, dominating on the glass near the rim. So I think that would be a solid pick. It's another pick that brings up discussions on what do you do with Jalen Duren? What do you do with Isaiah Stewart? I think with Clingan, it's like it gives you more leeway to bring him in, maybe bring him off the bench to start his career and figure things out. But I don't know. I think Clingan gives the Pistons an advantage in that 5 spot defensively for the long run if he ends up in Detroit.
Well, and he's so good defensively that I think it'd be almost a crime not to start him right out the gates. I mean, don't play him 36 minutes a night or anything crazy, but he is a decent lob threat. He can pass the ball a little bit. He has fairly good processing, which he showed a little bit in that championship game, which was a lot of fun to watch. He's just such an impactful, massive defender at the 5. And honestly, I mean, bring Duren off the bench, make him a super sub, get some offense and some buckets off the bench as your backup 5. Like, that is 48 minutes of fantastic center play if that's how you split it all out. So I would definitely be in favor of that. Before we get on to some other questions, we left off a few names from our top 5 that I could imagine getting some pushback from. That would be Matas Buzelis, Stefan Castle, and Cody Williams. So pick one of those guys and explain why they're not in your top 5.
I'm going to pick Matas, and I think I'm cheating a little bit because I had him at 6 and I debated between him and Connect. the reason I gave Connect the slight edge is just because of where the team is. And right now you have all these young pieces that you're developing. I think Connect, although he's still going to be a rookie, he's a much older prospect. You have a little bit more of an understanding on what he's going to do for you. He goes into a defined role, and he's a guy who can get buckets for you. Like, that's going to happen. Matas, like, he definitely has a lot more upside. He didn't shoot well this season in the G League. He shot well in high school. Like, he was the clear top prospect at points when, like, a year ago. So everything that happened there, like, I still think there's a ton of upside with Buzelis. I just think with where the Pistons are and depending on how they choose to move forward, I would give Connect the slight edge. That said, I would have a really tough time if they were on the board at 5. Those were the 2 guys there, and I had to pick one of them. And that's not even bringing like Cody Williams or Castle into the equation, like you mentioned.
Yeah, my thing with Buzelis is just the jump shot scares the crap out of me. Like, I like his effort on defense, even though he definitely needs to pack on some strength. He gets moved around quite a bit. That was a problem for him offensively as well. I don't buy the handle all that much. Like, I don't think he's a giant wing. I do think he's a 4. You may even want him playing some small ball 5 here and there. He's a very good weak side rim protector, but not a guy you'd really want guarding on ball all that much. Like, if he shot 40% from 3, I'd be all for it. But what did he shoot? 24? Like, it was
20,
bad.
27. I mean, the G League guys, like, it's the last year of the program. Like, they were like 4 and 20 something in the G League regular season, or maybe not even that good. So it was just a mess. So give him a bit of the benefit of the doubt there. But I like, if he comes in and can make it to an average 3-point shooter, like, he's a great pick. If he becomes an above average 3-point shooter, he's like far and away the pick. So it's just more of a swing for me, which I'm not sure is the right move based on where the Pistons are at this very day and time.
Yeah. Honestly, like, I look at Salon, Cody Williams, and Buzelis as being roughly in the same, like, ceiling category. They all could really hit it big. They all could not.
Yeah.
And the only reason I've got Salon so much higher is just because his motor runs so hot. Like, it's hard not, for me personally, it is hard to not bet on a guy that plays that hard on both ends, which is occasionally an issue for Matas, and it's definitely an issue for Cody Williams. But we'll leave it there. Let's get into some questions. This is from our guy KCP for 3, and it's through. Good question, I think. He says, building around Cade Cunningham is kind of the assumption for this. Would you rather have 4 Simone Fontecchios or, guys of that nature, right? Very good role players that fill a very specific need at each spot, or one of Karl Anthony Towns, CJ McCollum, DeMar DeRozan, Brandon Ingram, etc. So 4 Fontecchios or 1 all-star. What would you rather have?
This is a tough one because I think where the team is, you need both. Like, you need to know who's going to be that secondary scorer, creator, just star next to Cade. But in this scenario specifically, I lean towards 4 Fontecchios because I think if this Pistons season taught us anything, it's that the whole thing has to work or at least be cohesive for it all to make sense. And I mean, you see that across the league, like, but with the Pistons specifically, they didn't really have much of an NBA roster, and that's what sparked all the trade deadline moves. So I think moving forward, you have to be sure that the guys that you're surrounding on Cade Cunningham, and I mean, a guy like Fontecchio who can space the floor, shoot the 3, hopefully do some more things than that, put the ball on the floor, and at least like you need some of those guys to be good defenders and some of them to be able to initiate as well. But I just think overall, if I'm looking towards these right now, I think the 5 that are on the floor, Cade Cunningham plus the 4 others, have to make sense. Like, that's more important for me right now than putting, I guess, a star next to Cade. But it's a tough question because you need both.
Yeah, and I think you need the star to make sense too. So like for the sake of argument, that's the path that I take. Would you rather have 4 Fontecchios, all of which that makes sense, or 1 star player that does make sense? I think the answer to this, it depends on how quick you want to improve, right? I mean, 4 Fontecchios, you'll be better, but it really will just be on Cade Cunningham to get you, to that 30 win or higher threshold, which is already unlikely, right? Whereas adding another all-star caliber player, I mean, that does ratchet up your floor a lot quicker, especially with the cap space that the Pistons do have this offseason. Like, this isn't really an exact 1-to-1 split. We got another question here about Trae Young, and I was looking at it, and you could trade for Trae Young, re-sign Fontecchio, and still have about like $28 or $30 million to spend before you run out of room. So it's actually possible to do both, is what I'm saying. But directly to the question, I think if you want to play the long game a little bit, if you want to really focus on the young players that you currently have, as well as the one that you're about to draft, 4 Fontecchios is probably the better way to go, because that does push all the chips into that corner, the young player corner, but not to the extreme that they did last season. There is more NBA talent, like you said, on the roster, so they'll be better. How much better? Who knows? Adding another star, you'd have to get rid of some of those young players, and I do think you'd probably be better next year. Years beyond that, I think you can make the argument either way. Any more thoughts before we jump onto another one?
Just quick, like adding one of these secondary stars is more of like a pushing your chips in move. I think there's a way to address like the role players, improve a little bit, and then push the chips in at a later date, which might make more sense in terms of not just not potentially making things worse in the long run through one of these moves happening immediately.
All right, so we got 2 questions here from Mark Faust and from Big Cheese, both talking about the hobo, the head of basketball operations that they keep saying they'll be hiring sometime soon. The first one here, Mark Faust says James Edwards knew about the hobo search over a month ago. I'm sorry, the hobo search. That made me laugh. I'm sorry, bad podcasting. James Edwards knew about the hobo search over a month ago. Why did they wait so long to begin it? And then the Big Cheese is wondering, last season the Pistons were very public about their coaching search. Why are they being quiet about this one? So basically, what's going on right now? Why is it taking so long? We have heard from both the beat writers that they want to move this along quickly. So, why hasn't it? What's been going on? Thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know personally. And I have been pretty concerned as well. Like, I want this thing to be moved along quickly because whoever, I just can't bring myself to use these acronyms, like speak them into the airspace. But whoever this lead executive is, they're going to find out where they're picking in the top 5 in a few weeks. And then they have a draft at the end of June, and they have an off season shortly after that. I know, Wes, I think we were talking and Omari mentioned on the Pistons Pulse how they were tapping in a search firm, which happened fairly recently. So I want the hire, or I would think you would want the hire to be made fairly quickly, just so the dominoes can fall after and you can get on with the off season and figure out a plan once you have a new team in place. But I think there is an element to it where the organization, Gores, whoever's involved in it, is trying to make sure they're hiring the right person. I know I saw someone in the chat. I'm sorry, I'm not sure who it was, mention John Horst and potentially waiting for Milwaukee to be eliminated from the playoffs. If he's the guy, that would make sense. But overall, I'm sure we'll get some news in the coming weeks. I doubt this will be one that will drag on just because there are other dominoes to fall after this, at least so we think.
Yeah, my best guess, I mean, reading tea leaves, right? So Omari said last week that he knew, and this was public. This was out on the Pistons Pulse. I'm not reporting anything from Omari. One, he doesn't tell me anything, so I couldn't do it. But two, even if he did, I wouldn't. Anyway, so he said on the Pistons Pulse last week, not this most recent episode, that they were going to tap a search firm. They were going to tap a search firm to do it. This most recent Pistons Pulse episode, he said that they have tapped a search firm to do it. So sometime in the past week, they contacted someone, hired someone to actually go out and do the searching process. I mean, best guess, it probably takes, a week or two to actually bring the candidates in, get interviews scheduled, and start that ball rolling. I would guess in the next couple of weeks, like you said, next week or the week after, we'll probably at least have interviews. And then, it goes from there. As to why they didn't start the search sooner, I have no idea. I mean, it probably makes sense that they should have if they knew that they were going to do this. So the only answer I can really think of is they weren't 100% convinced that they were going to do this until the last few weeks of the season, which, I mean, fair enough, right? That's pretty reasonable. You don't want to rush into a thing like that. So let's get on to this next one. Still staying on the hobo search. So this is from Art Vandelay 81. Says, if a new hobo comes in and reviews last season and sees what has been locally and nationally recognized as a terrible coaching performance, will he want to bring in a new coach? And again, that is from Art Vandelay 81 in the DBB comments. So what is your expectation right now? Do you think that the new head of basketball operations is going to hire a new coach or not?
I think so right now. I mean, just framing it this way, when you have a new leader come in, I just assume, and I know nothing about how it actually works and how the search is working, but I would assume this new person would want to make their own hires, bring in their people. If they're the person that is in charge of moving this ship forward, they're going to want to do it their way. Maybe their way is with Monty Williams as the head coach of this team. I don't know. I sort of doubt that's the case just based on what the team did this past year and where they are. Maybe a younger coach makes sense, like one of those up and coming assistants that we heard names for and that were getting interviewed last year. So I lean towards yes for when the new executive is here and whether they're going to hire a new head coach. But at the same time, I don't know. I feel like it can swing one way or the other.
I've got two arguments for you that would go in the other direction. And just to play the devil's advocate, I'm going to give them now. First, you're a new head of basketball operations. We discussed it last week. You are probably moving on from Troy Weaver. That almost seems like a formality at this point. So that's one. So that's a whole new front office staff. That's probably, that's new, some new scouting staff. Like everyone in the front office of the organization is going to get turned over, or at least a lot of them are. You have a very young team who just went through something similar last offseason with a new coach and a new coaching staff. That's a lot of turnover for very young players. That would make me a little nervous. Now, on top of that, and I think this is probably the more solid or convincing argument, when you get hired, right, you're now the new head of basketball operations. Yes, I agree. You're definitely going to want to put everything in your vision. But by keeping the coach, you kind of kick the can down the road a little bit. I mean, we've seen this happen elsewhere. We've seen this even happen in other sports, right? New GM comes in, keeps the coach 1 or 2 years before hiring their guy, because the moment they hire their guy, they're on the clock. And if it doesn't turn around quickly with their guy, quote unquote, they're on the chopping block as well. So you could kind of kick the can down the road that way. Third thing that I just thought about that I've kind of wanted been to ask you for a little bit now. How many truly elite game-changing coaches are there in the NBA right now? Like off
Yeah.
the top of your head, Spoelstra?
Yeah, Spo. I mean, it Pop, like guys like yeah. So I don't know.
Right?
I'm with you on that. Like I get your point. And I mean a lot of how coaches end up performing is the players that are in the building, obviously. That's a no-brainer. But yeah, I don't know. Like I do get the turnover. Like you don't want your so if there is a new coach next season, that would be Jaden Ivey and Jalen Duren's third coach in only their third year. I'm
Yep.
wondering, just because of how the Casey situation turned out with him stepping down, going into the front office. I wonder if it's not so drastic here. I mean, it still
Good point.
is, but I wonder if that lessens the blow a little bit.
No, that's a very good point. I mean, with Casey sticking around, he absolutely had to have had some level of influence, right, with those players still. He's their former coach. I'm sure they still talk to him, even though he's not on the coaching staff and he's been doing scouting stuff. One last thing on the truly elite coaches. I want to make the reverse point as well. How many absolutely awful coaches in the past, decade can you think of? Guys that it wouldn't matter the roster you put around them, they would not win games. The only one that comes to mind for me is Jim Boylan.
Okay.
You got anyone else?
I mean, I don't know. Like, no, I don't even want to say it. Like the name that came to mind was Custer, but I don't
I
even
thought of
want
him too. He's too
it,
old though.
I
It would have
know,
been too
yeah.
old. He's out of the decade range.
Wrong time frame, but at the same time, yeah,
That's a
it's
good one though.
yeah.
Mo Cheeks actually might be a good one because it took him less than 40 games to lose the locker room. That's impressive.
Yeah, and I mean, it's all situational, like based on whatever you're coming into. But yeah, I don't. That's the thing. Like, do you like what you brought up? Do you make a move now, or do you wait a year or two to see what happens? Like, I don't think like a year or two may not even be on the table. Like that might be something
Mhm.
why a change is made now, just because nothing has really happened. No steps forward have been made in Troy Weaver's time here and before that. But yeah, I don't know. I'm interested to see that one, because like you said, I'm sort of at the point where I'm assuming that Troy Weaver won't be back, but Monty's the
Me too.
one that is pretty much 50-50 in my head.
Coffee brings up exactly what I was trying to get at. He says, I think you could find 50 coaches that could have won 14 games this season and maybe 3 that would have won 18 or more with this year's roster.
Yeah.
Yeah. It exactly. I think you could pretty confidently say the gap between good coach and bad coach in the NBA is largely dependent on context. And then the only guys that are outside of those on the other ends, I mean, they're rare. They're your Spoelstra. Brad Stevens was a guy who's
Hmm.
not a coach anymore. He's in the front office there. Pop was. I don't know if you could really make the argument now. Like it's just tough to find guys that are truly exceptional like that. Let's go to this next one from. Let's do this one from Big Cheese. It says, how much do you trust Troy Weaver if he's still around to make the best selection available in the draft if the Pistons don't get first overall? It says give it a percentage.
Oh God, this is a tough one. I'm gonna say like it Camille in the chat says 0, which I feel that. I'm gonna say if it's not one, I would have maybe like 40% confidence. Like I think he can make a good pick. I just with all like the questions and we don't know what's going on with Ivy, like SR Thompson's looking like a good pick. We know his hit rate, we know the picks that have been made, but this is like another reason why I want this executive search to be expedited because this draft is going to come up before we know it. We're going to know where the Pistons are picking in a few weeks. And if it is in that 5 spot again, like there are a ton of scenarios that can shake out. So I don't know where, like Troy's calling card is the draft. Like we've seen him make good picks. We've seen him make bad picks, certainly. So I haven't like lost all confidence in him making this draft pick, but I definitely don't feel great about it like I might have in recent years.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think it'd be a coin toss for me. So 50-50, right? I mean, if you look back, Killian Hayes, miss. Sadiq Bey, fine, fine pick. Isaiah Stewart, fine pick. Cade Cunningham was a hit. Ivy, I think, was a good selection still. Duran, jury's out. And then Asar Thompson, jury's out. So, I mean,
Troy
like,
Weaver,
fine.
he didn't take Jalen Williams, man. I don't know.
He didn't. No one was going to take Jalen Williams. No one saw this happening for Jalen Williams. I don't even know if the Thunder saw this happening for Jalen Williams.
Yeah.
But yes, he would be the guy to take in hindsight. But yeah, for me, coin toss. At the end of the day, though, like you said, the new head of basketball operations comes in. I think this is kind of a moot point. All right, let's go to this next one. This is from Broad Fork Advisor. Wants us to rate this offseason. So he's going to draft Donovan Clingan. He's going to sign Gary Payton II, sign Miles Bridges, sign Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, #PayKCP, and re-sign Simone Fontecchio. What's your grade on that offseason?
That's a solid like B plus for me. I think you're making the team better, and I'm assuming that there isn't a trade that happens that ships out like Ivy or Duran or anyone else. So I think you're improving the roster that you have. And I mean, you're bringing in a guy like Miles Bridges who could help fill a need on this team and potentially just be that off ball guy offensively that helps Cade Cunningham and maybe helps put the whole thing together. Clingan, we already talked about him. He addresses that defensive minded big, potentially coming up off the bench. And then you get another shooter in KCP, a good defender in GP2. I like it. I feel like there's probably a trade somewhere in there that happens. Like, I don't know if you're going to sign all three of those guys outright, but if you could, it makes sense.
I think I'm with you. I'd probably do a B as well. My issue with Miles Bridges on the basketball floor is on the defensive end. I'm not sure he's a good enough offensive player to really make up for the fact that he's so not good at the defensive end. But Clingan really does cover for that at this point. Big Cheese brings up Gary Payton II's injuries. That's a really good call up as well. Maybe, you hope in a low usage, low minute roll off the bench that could be fixed. Yeah, I mean, this is kind of the four Fontecchios path that we talked a little bit about earlier, right? Like all of these guys are solid. They all fill a role, and they're all rather unexceptional in that way. But they'd help. They would help. And you'd absolutely really be betting on Cade Cunningham, Jaden Ivey, Asar Thompson, and Jalen Duran. And to some extent, Isaiah Stewart as well, taking a step. Though I would again think that Clingan starts over Duran. So yeah, I mean, I don't hate it basketball wise. Yeah, I mean that's a solid B. Let's oh, this is a good one. This is from our guy Keep Khan. says, what is the likelihood, in our opinion, that the Pistons add one big fish, so that would be someone making $40 million or more, two large fish, so that would be people making $30 million or more, or three medium fish, $20 million or more this summer?
Yeah, I might cheat a little bit and say one large fish in the $30 million range. Um, I just don't know if on the market there are going to be like the guys in that $40 million range that are willing to take that money to come to this team right now. So I could see them paying $30 million to like a Gary Trent Jr. and if they have the highest offer, or like a D'Lo, a guy like that. But I don't necessarily see, if that happens, like bringing in and like another one. I think that you're looking at some smaller deals and potentially even like minimum contracts to round out the roster. I mean, also, I'm sort of just speaking in a free agency lens. There could be a trade and with a guy like this. But I don't know. I just don't see, like, I think it's likely that they bring in someone at the $30 million range, but I don't know if like two is necessarily there. And I think with the cap space, they're eventually going to need like the last 10 to 20 million to really like round out the end of the roster.
I think the trade thing that you brought up makes this a little difficult, because the moment that you add a 40 million plus guy, you lose the ability to add two $30 million guys. It eats into your cap space. I think if you're looking at combinations of these, there could be a situation where it's, one $30 million, a couple $20 million plus Fontecchio, or make a trade for one of the $40 million guys and then a few of the $20 million guys on the back end of that, because you'd have the flexibility to do it. I'm not sure which is most likely. Am I crazy for thinking it's almost most likely that they make a trade for a big money guy that some other team kind of just wants off the contract of? Like, there aren't too many guys in this year's free agency class that I'd be comfortable giving much more than $30 million to. I mean, D'Lo is that guy. Valanciunas gets close, but I'm not sure he'd get over 30.
What's Tobias
Malik
Harris's
Monk,
max again? Like,
higher.
would it be like 35?
I think so, but I'm not willing to give him that.
Yeah.
Like I
Yeah.
would rather give that to some of the other guys we've mentioned. Gary Trent Jr. is one. Gary Trent Jr. would probably get 30 or more. I mean, it's sparse.
Yeah,
Is the
it's
point?
not a
There's
good
not a lot
free
there.
agent
Pat
class.
will. You'd probably have to get close on to 30 with Patrick Williams to make the Bulls say no. That's presumably what he was asking for in a contract extension previously, when they passed on the ability to do so, let him become a restricted free agent. So if you want Patrick Williams, you're probably getting close to 30. None of these are. I'm not even sure how many of these are fantastic gambles, let alone guys that would have interest in coming to the Detroit Pistons, being as how bad the Pistons were this past season. So
Yeah,
eh,
I'll tell you who I'd give $40 million to, and that is Isaiah Hartenstein, and that is about
really,
it. Have you seen?
you give him 40? Oh, I love him.
Yeah, I mean,
He's awesome.
I might be getting like a little crazy, but I mean, I don't think there's any way he's gonna he's gonna resign in New York. But
Probably.
I mean, he just looks awesome, and I would love him as a starting center on this team. And he's just looked incredible pretty much the whole season, especially recently and in the playoffs too. Like, that's the one guy that sticks out to me. But yeah, everyone else is sort of in that like 30 range. Maybe, I mean, Monk is going to get paid. Who knows how
Yep.
much, but he's going to, I know I texted you about this, but in the Kings exit interviews, De'Aaron Fox was talking like Monk is already gone. He's going to go get his payday. So TBD if it's here, but it could be.
All right, let's talk about one of the guys that is getting over $40 million in salary. This is someone that was oddly linked to the Pistons about a week and a half ago, which was only odd because the Pistons don't have anyone leading their front office at the moment. So I'm not quite sure how there could have been interest there when they don't have someone that would be expressing the interest. Regardless, Trae Young. Dave Giancola on Twitter at DGiancola3 wants to know what our thoughts specifically on Cade Cunningham playing more of the two if Detroit were to make a trade for Trae Young. So I guess just generally, what are your thoughts on Trae, what it might take to get him, and then how he would fit in to Detroit?
Yeah, this one's a little like just messy to me because of Cade. While I think you can play Cade off the ball a little more, I just don't know if it's the best thing or like the best move to make for this team. I mean, if like bringing Trae in, you're obviously getting a 3-point shooter, a guy who can score. Like, are you willing to still let Cade be that primary initiator? Put Trae in the wing, in the corner, have him like just move off the ball and try to get open, be that drive and kick guy for Cade. But I just don't really see that happening. I see other avenues into a guy that you could bring in that just makes more sense for the roster, because I feel like if you bring in Trae, you're really sort of messing with what Cade Cunningham is for this team and can be. And also, I'm like not even bringing up what this means defensively. So you're not bringing in a good defender by any means. So if you bring in Trae and you're playing him next to Cade, you better make sure that the three other guys are staunch defenders.
Agreed. I agree with all that. Like, just speaking purely basketball wise, the only way this trade working, right? If the Pistons were to do something like this, were to go out and add a guy like Trae Young, whether or not that works is entirely up to Trae Young. If you look at both of those players, Cade Cunningham and Trae, both can score the basketball, both can pass the basketball, but Trae Young is a much better scorer than Cade Cunningham is. Okay, so you would absolutely not want to take Cade off the ball when both of them are on the floor. You would want Trae to just go get 30 every night. Every night. That would be his role. Just go get buckets, nothing more. And to that, I mean, in 2021, 2022, he did average 28 points per game. So he's a guy that can do that. He is a guy that can go score. This also would really remove any need for a backup point guard. It would kind of make sense for Marcus Sasser to stick around if they're able to keep him in that kind of trade. I'm not sure if they would. But you really would not want either of those guys off the court at the same time. And you'd effectively make Trae Young your backup point guard, right? So you try to structure the rotation so that anytime Cade sits down, Trae sticks out there, and now you just run all of the pick and roll action through him. It doesn't have to be like my turn, your turn, right? I mean, Trae Young can obviously play on the ball. He's fantastic at it. He's an all-star being a point guard, but he can play off ball. So can Cade. So, you could have fun running guard-to-guard pick and rolls. You could have fun just with driving kicks with both of those guys. Just the majority of the time when both are out there, I think you would want Cade running the offense, just because asking Cade to go be, that 30-point-a-night scorer is not in his skill set. So in terms of like a model to follow, both of the guys I'm going to name are significantly better than Cade Cunningham and Trae Young. But what Luka and Kyrie are doing to fit together in Dallas, you'd probably want to do a lot of the same stuff. So when they're both out on the floor, the offense runs through Luka. Kyrie's a scorer. When Luka sits down, Kyrie's the point guard. He gets others involved and he has fun that way. You'd probably try to do something similar. The defense is a problem, though.
Yeah.
Big problem. Like, you cannot have Jalen Duren starting. You cannot give up Asar Thompson, even though the Hawks, I believe, were rumored to have interest in Asar Thompson. You can't afford to get rid of him. You need him. You need to keep him out on the perimeter there as a defender. Last thing I want to ask you is, what would you think of like the value, right? What would the Pistons even have to give up to make something like that happen? I mean, Trae Young is all-star, all-NBA caliber. Like, he's fantastic, superstar point guard. Yes, Atlanta might be open to moving him, especially with how their season ended. And he's only 26, I believe, 25 or 26. So it's not like he's aging either.
Yeah, I don't even know if he's realistic to get. And I mean, for the points that we've brought up, I don't know if it's a good idea anyway, but like Big Cheese brings up, he's not sure why the Hawks would even want Ivy. I think if the Hawks are dealing Trae Young, like I think Jaden Ivey's included in the trade, but I don't think he's necessarily the cornerstone. I think when you're dealing a guy like that, like we saw what Rudy Gobert, what Dame, like what those kind of guys got, and it's all just draft capital. Like, yes, some good players get brought over, but I think like the shining stars or assets of the trade are the picks. The Pistons can give their pick this year, and then the one in like 2028 or 2029. Is that enough to get it done? I don't know. Like, I'm leaning towards no, just because what some other Trae Young-esque players have gotten on the open market. And we know what the Pistons draft capital situation is like. They aren't in a situation right now where they can deal 4 or 5 picks, and they probably shouldn't anyway.
I think the only thing that might knock this down into the loosely plausible range, and loose being the operative word, would be, I can definitely envision a future where DeJounte Murray is more valuable as a commodity than is Trae Young. I mean, we've already seen a report that the Spurs aren't all that interested in Trae Young. I mean, Trae is small. He's 6'2". He's not a good defender at all. Very, very poor defender. And at least to this point in his career, he's very ball dominant. It is difficult to win games with those guys as your best player. The Pistons are in a bit of a unique situation where they can pair him with a bigger guard who can do more off-ball stuff than DeJounte Murray, while also being good enough on ball to force Trae off the ball, which I don't think Murray is really at that level yet. Personally, anyway. So like I guess I'm saying I could see there's a world where maybe there just aren't a lot of suitors for Trae Young, and the Hawks kind of take what they could get because they want to reset, they want to build around DeJounte Murray, and they want to make a few runs at other stars instead. So like, I don't know, Ivy, Duren, Sasser, 2029 and a pick swap. Like, I mean, that's a lot, but it's
pick swap this year, everything. Right?
Or in the future. I think they could do a pick swap in the future as well. Don't quote me on that. Maybe they can't.
Yeah, I don't.
So maybe they'd have to pick swap this year. But either way.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't know.
I see it, and I mean, yeah, Atlanta. I mean, the name that they should build around is Jalen Johnson. That guy rocks.
Yes.
Like, yeah. So, I mean, you're right. I can see Trae, not like what you brought up with the Spurs, and maybe his price goes a little bit down, but then does Atlanta have a conversation like, you know what, let's try to find a way to work? I mean, there may not be a way to make it work, but if they're not getting like one of the hauls that we've seen in recent years, like maybe it just doesn't make sense for them to even pull the trigger.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I'd land too. And I do want to clear up just to make sure, I am not saying that Cade Cunningham is a better player than DeJounte Murray right now. Any Atlanta Hawks fans, if you are listening for some reason, don't know why you've tuned in, but if you are, I'm not saying that. I think DeJounte Murray is a better player than Cade Cunningham right now. Cade Cunningham is just a different type of player where it would make less sense to force him off ball to the extent that Murray has been, and to continue to do that your turn, my turn thing that they've got going on in Atlanta right now that isn't working all that well. Also, Cunningham predates Trae Young, where Trae Young predated DeJounte Murray, which is another thing that's a real thing in locker rooms that you can't really undervalue too much. Last thing, let's hit on this. This is talking about James Edwards III's proposal to fix the Detroit Pistons this offseason. Jonathan Schwartz says Jaden Ivey, Jalen Duren, and this year's first for McCall Bridges and chump change. He says that's a huge overpay. Obviously, there were a lot of other moves that took place in that piece by James Edwards III. If you guys haven't read it yet, please go do. It was very good. They'd also assumed that the Pistons would win the lottery. So to be clear, you're looking at Ivy Duren and Alex Sarr for McCall Bridges. I guess, what was your read on that offseason plan and that trade in general?
Yeah, I didn't hate it by any means. I think like a big piece of it for me, honestly, was like getting Dorian Finney-Smith back too. I think that's exactly the type of player that the Pistons need. And shout out to Sean Corp. He wrote a great piece on Detroit Bad Boys today about whether we're just like not sure if we should even give up on one or both of Ivy and Duren right now, which I think is a fair argument, especially if you're including them both with the first overall pick in the draft in this case. I think the way James framed it in his piece, or just like the moves he made, the roster looked good to me. It's definitely a better team, unequivocally. I think that team will improve. I think I was questioning what the starting five would look like, specifically the guard rotation. Like, do you start Caden Grimes, Caden Sasser? What does it look like? I think James also signed DeLon Wright as the backup point guard, which is a good move, but who is that for the future? So, I mean, I liked it. I think it's a little bit of pushing some of the Pistons' problems off to the Nets. Both organizations are in different scenarios, so I understand why it would make sense for both teams, but I think the only way the Nets do it is if they really want to build around whoever they're picking at number one overall, which I would guess is Alex Sarr.
I think that's the reason I was a little more hesitant with it. I really love McCall Bridges. He'd be a great fit for this team, for this roster, next to Cade Cunningham, everything. He'd be pretty ideal. He's still young. He's only 27, so it's not like, he's got a short runway here before he falls off. I'm more worried about trading that pick this season than I am about moving on from Ivy or Duren. Duren, mostly just because I'm not convinced he's a fantastic prospect because of his defense, which we've discussed previously on the podcast. But Ivy, if Monty Williams is still around, makes me a little bit nervous that you're just not going to get what you need out of him, because he's not going to be used in a way that's, conducive to him being Jaden Ivey. But that pick, I mean, I know that there's not star level talent as much in this year's draft, but there are a lot of guys that you and I both like quite a bit that would really help, and that you would have on cost controlled contract for 5 seasons.
Really. Yeah. Like we know that the number one pick this year is going to have value. Like, there are going to be teams that want it. I guess, just to play devil's advocate too, like after the Nets traded and brought in Michael Bridges, like there were those rumors that they were turning down 5 picks for him, which we know the situation that they're in with the draft right now. So
right.
Because of where the Pistons are with the picks in their chest, like that may be one that they would have to part with to move the needle. But Yeah, I'm with you. It's the number one pick in the draft. Like, you're not trading that in probably 99 out of 100 years.
Well, and shoot, I'd be saying this if it's the number 5 pick in the draft. Like,
Right.
there are
Yeah.
guys that I like in that spot too. And the fact that they're cost controlled is massive. The problem with the Nets is what you just mentioned. Like, they don't have picks right now.
Mhm.
They moved them all. They don't have picks left. So like they wouldn't have interest in, we talked previously about like a 2029 future first round pick, right? Like they're not going to have interest in that. They've got a pick in 2029. Like they don't care. They want a pick now. And that
Yeah.
would make it just really, really difficult for me to pull the trigger, more so than even that you're including both Ivy and Duran. Like, man, can we convince him to take Sasser? Would they want Stewart? Like something. Just I want to keep
I'd
the
say
pick.
probably not, but
No,
you
probably
could
not.
try.
Nah, yeah, they're not. I'm not sure that one would go through. The other thing is I'm not sure that would go through unless it's the number 1 overall pick, which means now
Yeah.
you're requiring that lottery luck.
Yeah.
They've not had a lot of that recently.
True.
And also, it is pretty unlikely. I shouldn't say that. It's not unlikely. Historically, it is rare for the worst record to get the number 1 pick since the draft lottery has been instated.
I mean, you only have a 14% shot, so if
Yep.
we're talking the probabilities, it's not likely.
Yeah, exactly. So, all right. Do you want to hit on one more, or do you want
Let's
to
do it.
close this
Let's
out?
do it.
All right. Let's do it. Let's do this one. Another trade candidate. This is from our guy Camille. Says, what are your thoughts about trading for Brandon Ingram? Says he's heard he has a hard time understanding Pistons fans after a 68 loss season that they aren't all that interested in Brandon Ingram. So I don't know what he's seeing there. I haven't seen much discussion of Brandon Ingram, but apparently there are Pistons fans that don't want him. What do you think about Brandon Ingram as a target, though, for the Detroit Pistons?
I like it. I mean, he's the only thing that I'm thinking is he's just signed through next year. Is he going to sign an extension in Detroit? If he's, I mean, either way, like, what are you going to give up to give him? I don't think like New Orleans is just going to want to offload his money next year by any means. But if you're not sure if he's going to sign that extension here, like, you probably shouldn't give up that much to bring him in. Yes, he makes his team better. I think he's a great like second scorer or like star, quote unquote, to put next to Cade. But it's like I question the long term. I think it should definitely be explored, but I don't like if he was signed for at least 2 more years, I would be like, yeah, and let's give up like one of Ivy and Duran and maybe like that future pick or maybe even both Ivy Duran. I don't know. Like whatever you need to get him, but yeah, I don't know if 1 year of Brandon Ingram is worth giving up a ton of your like young assets.
Yeah, the 1 year thing is the reason to pause, I think. That would make me nervous. I do think, in general, I'm very, very open to just adding a guy that can go get buckets.
Hmm.
Just bottom line, what's your role with the team? You're going to go score as many points as you can every single night. And then you just kind of tell everyone else that, everyone else not named Cade anyway, that look, you're going to play defense and you're going to shoot the basketball. Otherwise you can go somewhere else. Like that's the end of it. You're either going to figure it out or you're gone. Uh,
Yeah.
I'm very open to that. Brandon Ingram's very much that kind of guy. I don't think he's necessarily as bad a defender as what his reputation is, but he's certainly not a good defender. He's just a guy that can score. He shoots the ball well. He can score in isolation. He can play make. He can handle the ball. Does everything up from that 3 spot offensively that you want. So, like, yeah, he'd be a very, very good fit. You'd want some assurance that you could re-sign him, though, and that
Yes.
makes it a little more difficult.
100%. Like you, and if it's like I mean, this deal wouldn't happen at the deadline, but if it is like during the season next year, I think you would have to show that the team is better and you can go out and get Brandon Ingram and convince him to stay long-term, sort of what Indy did with Pascal Siakam this year.
Or flashback to Paul George when Weaver was there in OKC.
Oh, gosh.
Right? They made that big trade for him, and it was a big question. Is he going to stay? Is he going to go? And he stayed, only for them to trade him later on. But anyway, I think we should wrap it up. We are only about 45 minutes from the draft. So the NFL draft, that is. So everyone who stuck with us, thank you. We appreciate it. Go have some fun watching whatever the heck the Lions are going to do tonight. And yeah, thanks for tuning in. Blake, take it away, man.
Yes, thank you all for joining right before the NFL draft. I hope anyone that is down there in downtown Detroit has fun and stays safe. And thank you again for joining us. Special thanks to our guy, Sean Court, managing editor at Detroit Bad Boys, for supporting the show. And shout out to all you guys again for the great questions and talking points tonight. We'll catch you next week, whether on your commute or live with us here on YouTube. We can't wait to talk more Detroit hoops with you all.